If you're selling to the customer, you need to know what's on the customer's mind. And that's always been of great importance to what NACS does, also with its work with the Transportation Energy Institute. Today, we're going to be talking about a new white paper that came out from the Transportation Energy Institute called Consumer Survey 2025, Driver Behaviors and Perspectives. We're going to talk about why the survey was done and what it means to you. Joining us for our conversation today is John Eichberger. He is Executive Director of the Transportation Energy Institute. Prior to that, NACS lobbyist in terms of fuels and has been steeped in the fuels business for well more than 2 decades. So thanks for joining us again, John.
Thanks, Jeff, making me feel nice and old. I love the beginning of this conversation.
Seasoned, my friend, seasoned.
Experienced.
So we've been doing these surveys for, I think it's 17, 18 years now. We started way back when we were trying to use these consumer surveys to largely tell lobbyists and legislators what's on consumers' minds, because that has an effect of how people sell their product and what people will do to save a couple cents a gallon. How do they feel about gas prices? And that's continued over the years, where we've gone a little ways from how do we tell the story to lobbyists, because I think a lot of people now get our industry, the fueling industry, and it's much more big picture. And what the fuels surveys now do is they really look at what does everybody need to know about what's in consumers' minds and how does it affect what they do on a day-to-day basis. So you want to kind of walk us through why TEI, Transportation Energy Institute, decided to put out this white paper that goes into all kinds of factors that look at consumer behavior.
Yeah, we've been doing the survey for a long time, and it was great to be able to partner with NACS and Bold to get some questions out there that we were very interested in through TEI. Our job is to help people understand how the market can improve emissions and how to achieve our environmental objectives for transportation. So for a long time, we've been talking about electric vehicles, or some people say the white knight to the environmental movement. Lost some luster. The administration in 2025 is not all gung-ho about electric vehicles or looking for diverse energy strategies. And so we believe that the transition to a lower emitting transportation sector globally is not going away. That continues to be a priority for leaders in industry and government around the world. But we have always said that in order to achieve those objectives, we have to do it in a way that is affordable and that matches the needs of consumers. So when you start thinking about, okay, what kind of alternative fuels, what kind of alternative powertrain vehicles would be successful to help reduce emissions, you have to understand what the consumers want. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we've seen the last few years is vehicles come to the market, the consumers just don't want to buy. And no incentive, no encouragement, no media barrage is going to convince them to spend $50,000 on a vehicle they don't want. And so when we approached this survey with you, I was thinking, okay, we need to understand how consumers currently fuel their vehicles, what's important to them, what their attitude is towards the vehicle market today and the next couple of years, and what are they interested in, what would they consider, and how those marry up to really understand, well, how can we serve the consumer's needs while reducing emissions and keeping costs in check, because consumers were absolutely clear, do not raise the cost to my life because I will not respond positively. And, for 20 years, that's been where they are. They do not like spending money on transportation, and that's not going to change.
And you mentioned Bold. We did this survey with Bold Decision, who we've worked with for a couple of years now. Before that, they had a different name, working with the same people there. So long-standing relationship with a nationally known polling group. I mentioned that we used to work together where we looked at specific convenience store needs, and we still are. You will see articles in the September, October, and November issues of NACS magazine looking at some of the convenience-focused insights of this. But let's look at some of the broader ones that you looked at, because your constituency is much beyond convenience. It's looking at auto manufacturers, it's looking at environmental groups, everybody that has a stake in transportation energy. One of the big findings that we always ask in the beginning is, how are you feeling about the economy?
Yeah.
And how much do gas prices impact your view of the economy? And going back to what you were just saying about price, after coming out of the pandemic with several years of inflation and inflation being top of mind with people, people are not in a particularly optimistic mood about the economy, and they are looking for value. And it's whether it's a snack inside the store or whether it's a car that takes them to that store.
Yeah, 57% of consumers, almost 2/3, were very or somewhat pessimistic about the economy. And, it's ironic. We also asked them, what's your most important factor in buying gasoline? And it's still around 70% say price. Prices, that was about the same percentage as in 2024. Yet the retail price at the time of the survey in 2024 compared to 2025 was markedly different, a lot cheaper in 2025. So they were not paying nearly as much at the pump as they were the previous year when we did the survey, but they still cared. And so some people believe that as prices come down, gas customers get happier. They don't. They hate buying gasoline. And so that their pessimism, their anxiety about prices remain. They still go out of the way. They say they'll go out of the way to save money. And when we ask them how does gas affect your financial economy, it's always high. And we've said this, we're putting these price signs on 20-foot poles on the corner. It's the only consumer price for any product you can shop for the best price at 45 miles an hour, because we're in your face all the time. So we're constantly reminding you what's going on. And if you're upset about anything, you see a gas price sign, you're typically not going to be happy. Even when the price is low. I'm in California right now while we're doing this, and there are no such thing as low gas prices here. But
low is if it starts in 4.
And we were there. I actually saw a price sign start with a 3 yesterday.
Oh.
I think they must have lost their mind. But
might have been an 8 that was faded.
They were 20 cars deep, right? To get gas. But you ask them about these things, and you need to understand how they feel about the economy in general. And one of the things we did when we put this paper together is, okay, we need to understand the sentiment of consumers when they were being asked these questions. Okay, so gas prices in 2024, the time of survey, were $3.60 national average. They were $3.19 national average this year. Oil prices were down from $80 to $64. The Michigan consumer sentiment of U.S. consumers had been on a 5-month decline. Shortly after the survey, it started going back up. It was at this lowest point in a couple years. Unemployment was about 4.2%. There was tariffs. There were economic conflicts with Canada. There were ICE raids. There were riots. There was so much going on. Yeah, we looked at what's the impact of gas prices on their sentiment. I think because prices come down, yeah, that's a bully pulpit for them to point to. But there was so much uncertainty that I think they were just feeling kind of beat up a little bit, not sure what's going to happen next. And so the pessimism was a lot higher than if we did the survey today, where tariff turmoil is a little more subsided. They may be less concerned because the media has changed. But you have to, and that's one of the things my colleague, when we were looking at this, look, we have got to paint the picture of what's going on in the world when we ask them these questions, because it can't be viewed in isolation. But it is what they told us was still very telling in terms of how they feel about transportation. That's something that we really tried to pull out in this study.
And the other thing is, when we do these surveys, whether it's looking at what people are buying inside the store or the vehicles that took them to the store, it's a trend line. And you look from year to year to year, that takes out a little bit of the noise. You see some things have increased over the last few years. We've seen in our C-store specific questions, people are more likely to go to the store they like than to the store that has the cheapest gas price. And that is because of cleanliness, because of the quality of the people, because of the great food inside. So that's been a quantum shift that we've seen and measured over the last few years. what about in terms of looking at vehicles? Now, that's a big part of looking at consumer sentiment today is what it takes 5 years to design and get a car from blueprint to showroom.
Yeah, and that's
And
for
you need to
modest
understand,
adjustments.
but it takes a while. And you really need to know, is there a trend line in how people are thinking differently to see if something will be met with acceptance several years down the road.
Yeah, well, remember, we took the survey in May of 2025. Tariffs were in the news every day, and automotive imports were targeted heavily. The administration had declared they're going to end the tax credit incentive for electric vehicle purchases. There were conversations about changing fuel economy standards, a lot of uncertainty about transportation. And I think how that affected consumers' mindset is half of Americans told us now is a bad time to buy a vehicle. But next year, almost 2/3 think prices are going to be even higher. And so we had less than 40% said that they may buy or lease a car in the next 2 years. And, when you have that type of mindset, you're looking at an automotive industry that is kind of reeling from such dramatic changes in policy that, those automakers got to be thinking, man, what are we going to do? Now, you're seeing them recalibrate what their strategies are, what vehicles they're going to bring to market next year. And I think that matches with what we learned. 82% of the consumers we talked to said they were likely to consider a gasoline vehicle for the next purchase. These are the ones who may buy a car in 2 years. 37% said they're likely to consider a hybrid electric vehicle. That's pretty high. And hybrids have been on an upward trend of purchasing for quite a while, up like 67% in the last 2 years in terms of vehicles sold. Less than a third said they were likely to consider a battery electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid vehicle, but it was still 28%. When you think EVs are only about 8% of sales today, 28% of consumers said, yeah, I'd consider one. And that goes back to understanding what they want. If you look at the best-selling EV, it's a crossover utility vehicle. That is more than half of vehicles sold in the United States. That is the number one crossover selling in the United States is an electric vehicle. Far and away. We're talking by magnitudes of delta to number two. If you deliver the vehicle type, the capabilities, the comfort, the amenities that the customer wants, they'll buy it. And I think that's a lesson that the automakers need to pay attention to because they still want to sell EVs. There's still a market for EVs. I think that market's still growing because we saw even people had a much more positive attitude about EVs this year than they did last year, despite the news of the first 5 months of this year.
Do you think there's also just a better understanding of what these options are? Because there's ICE engines, and we call them ICE, internal combustion engine. Maybe other people don't think of them that way. They call them gas powered or regular. Right. Then you have hybrid. Then you have plug-in hybrid, and you have EV, and maybe there's a little bit more clarity also in consumers' minds because to see that number, 37% say they want hybrids or they consider a hybrid, that seemed to be almost come out of nowhere, even though hybrids have been around for an awful long time. I think people are seeing, okay, there's gas, there's EV, and then there's this thing in the middle that doesn't require any change in behavior and gets me some of the things I like. And that might do a lot for both how vehicles are sold to how vehicles are fueled over the short term.
We've seen some automakers stop producing pure gasoline variants in certain models and only produce hybrids. And their sales did not suffer. And I remember back in early 2000s, you and I chatted about this. I wrote a couple articles for NACS saying, look, at the time I drove a hybrid, I said hybrids have an opportunity to be a huge part of the market, but we have to make them a easy replacement. They can't be funky. That's great for the first movers, but for the rank and file family buyer, they don't want a funky, hey, look at me car, right? They want a typical car that fits their needs, but gets them better fuel efficiency. At the same time, you need to improve the acceleration and you need to reduce the cost. Well, now you get a vehicle that's hybrid, you can't tell that it's anything different than the traditional ICE gasoline vehicle you bought, but you're getting 40 to 50 miles per gallon. You're getting more miles per tank. You're getting better acceleration because that battery's kicking in and helping the engine accelerate. Getting a smaller engine with a battery propulsion. You're getting just a superior technology. And that's what we're starting to see. The fact that hybrid sales last 2 years are up almost 70% is unbelievable. Now, keep in mind also, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, there were a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 auto dealers wrote to their manufacturer, please stop selling us EVs, send us hybrids. We can sell hybrids every day. We can't sell these electric vehicles. And that was a kind of a reality check that the consumers, some of them want to buy EVs, and they should be allowed, they should have the ability to do that. They should have a selection to choose from, right? And they do, and that's fantastic. It's really exciting. But not everybody wants to buy them. Maybe someday down the road they will. But that hybrid is viewed by many as a stepping stone to relying more on electricity. But as you said, you don't have to plug in a traditional hybrid. It just recharges through operation. So there's no plugging. There's no change in behavior. All you're doing is getting the benefits of acceleration and efficiency with no extra change in behavior. And if you think back to everything we've learned about consumers, they don't want to change unless it's their choice.
So we went from hybrids, don't no longer feel funky to people, and people don't like to change. Now let's talk about change. Also, the white paper looked at some things that are different for people. EVs, they are different, but I think people are a little used to them. But also things like autonomous vehicles and rideshare, and where are people's minds around that? Because how does that affect future consumer behavior? You want to walk us through a little bit of the findings and why it matters related to autonomous vehicles and rideshare?
Yeah, it's funny. A couple of years ago, there were a couple of reports came out that I attacked because I thought the premise was flawed and the assumptions were absolutely unrealistic. But they kind of predicted in 10, 20 years, people wouldn't have personal vehicles anymore. They would all be riding in the electric, autonomous, mobility as a service, transportation as a service products, and nobody would own a vehicle. I mean, one former auto executive came out and said so far, in 20 years, the Congress will take the keys out of your hand because these will be safer. Okay, we're nowhere near that. I don't think we're going to get there, but you're starting to see robotaxis from Waymo, Tesla, other companies gain market share and expand their footprint in San Francisco, Los Angeles, Austin, Las Vegas, Phoenix. You're starting to see a growth in autonomous technology. And, from the convenience perspective, autonomy needs to be a point of interest because it could be a point of concern. If the vehicle is driving and making decisions on how to get places, how does the convenience retailer show up in the consumer's decision process if they are giving the decision process to a computer driving the vehicle? So understanding the pace of change there is important. Now, I've got colleagues who think autonomy is going to be a major factor in 3 years. I'm more along than maybe 15 to 20 because there's so many hurdles have to be overcome. But you're looking at a situation where we have an autonomous, 50% of consumers have a negative attitude about the technology. 25% are positive. That changed a little bit where there's a slight increase in those who are positive about autonomous vehicles. I think just because the story has been told, there's been more success stories than negative stories, but you still have a major learning curve because it's not something that everybody can experience. And until you experience it, you're going to be suspicious. Most people will. And I think that's coming out. Now, younger people are a little bit more open to it. Men are more open to it. Those earning a lot of money are more open to it. But this was consistent across a lot of the alternatives we asked about. Men seem to be a little more adventurous at trying something new in their vehicle. Young people are more open to advanced technology, more affluent consumers. You start talking to 65 and older, you want to talk about resistance to change? It doesn't get much more pronounced than that. So, but autonomous vehicles have a long way to go. And then the other part of that whole theory a couple of years ago was ride sharing. And there was a big boom in ride sharing, Uber and Lyft and some others. The pandemic hit, and the personally owned vehicle became popular again because
Safety
it was
zone.
a safe zone. Exactly. I don't want to get in a car with somebody I don't know. That's kind of subsided a little bit. Uber and Lyft are still really popular. Half of consumers have a positive attitude towards rideshare. Now, do they want to use that every day for all their? Probably not. Um, some communities, maybe. If you're living in New York City, owning a vehicle is the worst experience possible. Parking, insurance, traffic. So having a ride share opportunity to get you around town and then renting a car for a weekend journey is different. So we're seeing that ride share is a solid choice. I question if it's ever going to be your primary choice for everyday mobility, but it's something that we need to be looking at, paying attention to, because it does continue to grow.
So I mentioned at the outset that you represent a wide variety of stakeholders. This is an 80-something page report. There's a lot here. Um, when when you took this to your membership and said, "This is important. We want to do this," what did you tell them, and what was their reaction that led to this report that they said, "This is what we want this report to say"?
So it's important to recognize that our peer review process does not give our board the ability to dictate the outcome of a study. So we develop a study parameters, questions we want to ask, things we want to review. The board's review is to determine, is it accurate and is it objective? In a consumer sentiment study, it's not really trying to uncover new knowledge. It's really a pulse of the market and a snapshot in time. And so for this one, we had pretty wide range of what we wanted to ask. So we looked at the traditional study that you put together for NACS. Said, okay, what elements of that would we be interested in evaluating on a more granular basis, looking at different demographic profiles? So our report breaks every question that we were interested in into, okay, what's the national average? What would the males, the females, different age groups, the incomes, the regions, the rural versus suburban versus urban. We looked at all that stuff, right? And it's really just helping dissect the market. So when the board looked at this, the really only question they had were, okay, so we need to understand the context of the survey. We need to make sure that people understand this is a snapshot in time, and we want the information to be presented clearly. Now, if we had come out and tried to say, this study tells us that the future of electric vehicles is blah, they would have had something to say about that, because that's supposing a causal effect and where the market's going to go. And we try to stay away from predicting those things. But when they looked at this, they're very interested in this. They also understand that this is extremely important to understand the context as we look at the potential market for synthetic fuels, the market for electric vehicles, the market for advanced biofuels for lower emissions. So they recognize this as a foundational basis for the potential success of new products they may want to bring to market. And so that was kind of the perspective they took with this one.
I thought it was a great point that you made, because I spent some time looking through the NACS archives of late. And we used to have these future studies where we predict what the future would look like in 5 years. And I think the key is, when you put out a future study that looks at 5 years from now, you have to quit within 5 years, because people are going to mock you, because it's very difficult to be right in predicting the future. Especially when you have to say, in these 5-year reports, it has to be compelling. It can't say, well, 3% more will do this and everything else will kind of feel the same. That's not what people want to hear. They want to hear how we have jetpacks and all that stuff. But It was great in reviewing this document, and anybody downloading it. It is a great resource to say, as you said, snapshot in time. There's no judgment on what these numbers mean. Here's what they are. Use them with other numbers you have, and look at it as to how it could guide your decisions, because this is what customers feel as of close to mid 2025. And we'll continue to survey, and some of those numbers will adjust. Some will amplify a trend, some trends will go away. And that's the beauty of consumer surveys. It's paying attention to those long-term trends and not jumping in too fast, but jumping in fast enough that you can beat the competition.
And your point about forecasts, I had a good friend of mine who did forecasts say every forecast is outdated the second it's finished. And they're all predicated on the assumptions. So there have been forecasts the last couple of years that I have taken some pretty strong liberties of questioning, because they say by 2030, half of vehicles sold in America will be electric. Like, under what conditions, under what circumstances, under what assumptions, under what scenario, and what are the alternative scenarios? Oh, in my presentation a lot, I put a picture of Don Rumsfeld, former Secretary of Defense, and he's famous for saying there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. We don't know what might happen over the next 5 years. So our first paper at the Fuels Institute at the time was, what will we drive in 2023? There's a 10-year forecast of what the vehicle car park might look like. So 2 years ago in 2023, we asked that same company to do a post-mortem analysis. Why were the things that we got wrong, why did we get them wrong? And they basically, there were 5 major inflection points in 5 years that we could not have predicted. The pandemic being one of them.
Right.
Dieselgate being one of them. You know,
2 big ones.
Right. The crash of the oil markets. The popularity of the Tesla models coming to market, the Model 3 being so popular. So there were certain things that, you know, a conscientious forecaster could not have predicted and anticipated. And that's what I stress to everybody. When somebody tells you this is what the future is going to be, don't buy into it. It's a potential future. It's a possible future, but it is predicated on so many things being a certain way. And all it takes is somebody to step on a butterfly, and 5 of those things will change. So the butterfly effect is a big deal, and it's something we need to be paying attention to, because we can't know every element that could affect the trajectory of the market. And so the best we can do is prepare to be flexible and nimble. And then we can take advantage of trends when they show up. And when the trends fail or fade, we can shift and capitalize on what our consumers, our customers need. If we stay focused on what the customer wants and what the customer needs, you can be successful. If you're chasing breadcrumbs that some analysts laid out for you, but there's no consumer foundation to it, you got a pretty good chance of getting burned.
So follow the facts, follow the trends. That's great advice for reading this paper. Where can people find it and read it?
Transportationenergy.org. We have a tab that says research. Every paper we've published in the last 12 years is there. Every paper we publish is free. Our goal is to provide information and insight so people have a better understanding of what's going on in the market. So transportationenergy.org, and this is easily found on our research tab.
Well, it's still going to the beach season, so it could be beach reading, whether on your e-reader or if you have a nice printer, have at it and take a look at those 80 pages. Some real good stuff in there. So thank you once again for joining us today, John.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the time, man. Good seeing you.
And thank you all for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.